My next question is, what is the interview format of a management consulting position? I mean, in terms of, are there any technical rounds or behavioral interviews, or how many number of interviews are there?
Sure. So I went through, when I think about it, it's like 4 interviews. So the first interview is the general interview that you have in the beginning where they kind of see who you are, get to know you, ask you questions about your resume. This is the interview that is directly after you give in the application and they call you back. So this is a time where you read up on the company, you kind of see, some of their metrics, some of their facts. And this is when you really talk to the recruiter about what you would like to do and your future goals. And this is typically like a 30-minute interview. After that interview, you kind of get pushed on. I was invited then to a second round interview. This second round interview typically is kind of like an observational one. We were asked to go to a dinner, and we had a few executives, managing directors, senior managers from the company join us for dinner. And this is where they want to see how you can interact in public, on behalf of the company and in front of the client. So we were at a dinner, which is something that you will more than likely do when you are working on a client. And they're kind of observing, what is the conversation you're bringing to the table? How do you respond to questions? Are you, just as I mentioned in the last response, are you standoffish? Are you on your phone, or are you asking questions about work? How do you conduct yourself? So after that interview, which I think is a very smart interview to have, after that one, I was then invited back for the case interview. So this is like, I guess you can say it is behavioral. It just all depends on what the firm would like to present to you. And they give you a problem. And with that problem, they look at how you analyze the details and the descriptions that was given to you, and what you prioritize, what you see is the most pertinent information, and then the type of solution you derive from it. So some people will need a pencil, they'll use paper and pencil, and they'll write down like a chart. They'll write down like an issue tree. Some will highlight a few numbers. It really just depends on how your mind works. So with this interview, I'd say it's really important. Some people really, really prepare. There's this book called Cracking the Case that a lot of my colleagues would read. And then some people didn't really prepare too much for the case interview because you've kind of done a few of these type of projects in the real world. And that's kind of where I was, because I was doing, the social media marketing, and it was kind of consulting at the time, but I didn't know. So when the case came in front of me, it was just like another case that I'd seen all the time that I've been working on. I would suggest studying, kind of looking at different cases, because they look to see what you identify first. And there's really no right or wrong answer. It's just what you see is most important, and they're looking to see how the wheels in your brain turn. And then the final interview is kind of where they discuss what your life would be like in Accenture. That's when they talk about, your benefits. That's when they talk about what are the expectations. So they'll say, are you willing to travel? And here are the perks of traveling. Here are some people you can talk to see, how their life is traveling. Which office would you want to be in geographically? What are your salary expectations? The final interview is where you really get to ask questions. They'll present to you how amazing the company is, and you get to ask, will this fit my needs? Can I lead a happy life with this, and etc. That's usually also the confirmation interview. So if you're getting a call back after the case and they want to speak to you some more, you can probably guess that they would like to offer you a position. So I had 4 different interviews before I was asked to come on.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I'd like to add to the case round or to any other round, when interviewers, when I gave my case round of interview, my interviewer asked me so many questions. I was like, is he trying to grill me? But then I realized that he was just trying to see how I behave in a pressure situation. If I was able to calmly answer his questions, or I was losing my patience. So that is again very important.
Mhm.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jessica. So my next question is, what are 4 to 5 common and challenging interview questions that you have encountered or that you would recommend for management consulting positions? Maybe you have encountered in these questions in any of these 4 rounds that you have just mentioned.
Sure. So the first one would probably be, so from the first round, this is when they were kind of just asking about my interview. One of the questions was about my previous work experience, and this may be different from everyone else, but as I mentioned, I did the marketing and I kind of was doing consulting on my own. And they asked me to tell them about a time where one of my experiences was able to produce tangible results. So that is a little bit difficult because you have to kind of quantify your impact and you have to speak to how it has positively and negatively impacted. So this is going to be a chance, well, they will ask you a question and maybe you don't want to go back to that job, you don't want to think about that situation, but you have to kind of spin it and show how it both has positively and negatively impacted you. And just a quick example, when I was working on my social media marketing, I was managing a few influencers that were popular on Instagram. And it was difficult because I would bridge a few campaigns to the influencers or the models, as we would call them. And at times, we would secure a deal and they're like, okay, we're going to market your product. But then I'd go to the model and she didn't answer the phone all weekend and she wasn't responding to emails all weekend. The communication wasn't there, or they didn't want to do it. And it's like, I've already promised something to the client in this case, and the person to execute it is nowhere to be found. How am I going to fix this? That's something that's a little alarming that you would not want to, it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to mention that in an interview where I'm trying to be a consultant. But then it showed how I overcame adversity. So I was able to spin that around because they asked about that clearly on my resume. So you're going to have to answer questions you don't want to answer up front. And trust me, they read your resume. Don't think they just kind of skimmed it. They have questions. So the second interview, this one was when I was at the dinner. They asked what my future career goals are. So this is a typical question, but when you are face to face with someone who has put in several years, I mean like 10 plus years into a company, and they're seeing you that you're very young. In fact, I believe one of them started working for Accenture the year that I was born. So so it was like, oh, back in the 90s, like he asked what my career goals were, and I was like, oh, I don't know what to tell you because you knew your life and I was in the crib. I didn't even know how to speak yet. So they're also, it showed, that he was clearly of a different generation, and me being a millennial, there's an imbalance. They really want to see where my mind was. So for me to just say, well, I want to be a senior manager, that's too open-ended. I had to come up with, my future career goal is to excel in the form of a project manager. And I want to be able to manage 8 to 9 projects at the same time. See, that was more defined, and that's something that's attainable. And that's something that someone such as him asked me, and I was able to respond to, and he can measure that as well, because he's like, oh, I know what it's like to manage more than one project. So don't say I want to be the best consultant there is. That's too open-ended. Define that some more. The third interview, the case, oh my goodness, the case interview is always a little frightening because you don't know what the right answer is, and then at times there's no right answer. They just really want to see how you're moving. So I think the most, like, I guess, challenging part was, my case was asking about, for really quickly, a company had many call centers and they were losing a lot of revenue. They weren't making much profit, and they were trying to cut down on a few expenses. So you can either say a solution is to cut how many call centers we have, or add more so that they're there 24 hours, so that if customers are calling, they always have somebody to speak to. You see, those are two answers that work, but you have to figure out which one is the best answer. So at first I started to say, well, you know what, you can add more call centers. And the person interviewing me was like, more? And so I'm like, oh my gosh, that question was hard. Him just saying more was hard, because now I have to kind of show you my thoughts. I have to explain to you why this would be the best answer. And there is no final answer. I ended up switching my mind. And I was like, actually, no, how about we instead of 200 call centers, let's have 8. And they can all be somewhere in a country overnight where we're awake or something like that, and time zones. And so I fixed it up and I changed it. But I would say for that one, the hardest question is explaining why your answer can work. And then the final one, so this would be like my fourth, would be with the final interview where they're kind of telling me about my life at Accenture. A difficult question that they were asked was, what is your expectation? And so this is difficult because we are all different in our personalities, in what we hope to get out of this, and what our work-life balance wants to be. And consultants, depending on your tier, depending on how many years you put in, you can make a very good salary with bonuses. And then, but for some people, that's not what they put on a pedestal. They want to make sure that, they can come home to their family every week, every night. And then you have other people who care more about, well, I want to make sure I'm coding all day. So it's like, that's a difficult question because you never want to offend the company you're working for. I think at one point I was like, I make sure my health is always tip top shape. So are the benefits exemplary so that I can make sure if I'm sick, like I can head to the doctor like right away? And they were like, yes, yes, yes. But you see, that's a difficult question to answer because you don't want to offend someone and say like, do you guys actually have good benefits? You know what I mean? Like it can come off as too pushy or offensive. So what are your expectations as working part of this company, as a citizen and employee of this company in general? Is it could be a difficult question to respond to.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Jessica. And again, like I've seen like some of the candidates ask like, oh, what is the maybe the salary range or the benefits? And again, this question was basically to assess your requirements from the position, right, or from the company. So it's
Yes.
actually you're asking the same question in a different manner.
Precisely. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. And Jessica, what resources would you recommend in terms of books, websites, or the blogs to prepare for management consulting interviews? I remember you already mentioned the case
Cracking the
competition,
case. Yes.
cracking the case, yeah. But what
Yeah.
are the other potential resources that one can use to prepare for management consulting interviews?
Sure. So I would say, believe it or not, Google. I would Google and I would go to the different firms and see what research they've done and published. I say this because, I have a colleague who had to do something for strategy, and present it to, a board that she was trying to become work for. And with me being a consultant, she was able to look up something Accenture published about the product that she was looking to do, either the product or the industry. So part of remaining a top tier firm and remaining an expert is to constantly be doing research. And so within our portals, after becoming an employee, we use Harvard Business Review. We have lots of just economical, we'll use Bloomberg, we'll use Business Insider, wherever we can find credible research to back up our claims and to further our expertise. That's where we search for. And so what I would say is that, at times I had to do a company profile, while I was in business school. We were able to find statistics and facts from visiting, EY's blog. And we were able to look, Deloitte had a lot of facts as well. Google these consulting firms, look at the research they produce, or look for their scholarly articles that show, that talk about the claims, about the products, about the industries, the industry research, so that it's kind of like you're using their evidence in the interview, which is great because they're like, oh, you read. So how impressive would it be if you had an interview where they're asking you questions about, you know, Uber, or they're asking you about like ride sharing, and you actually had information from an article that they published with the results for ride sharing trends for the next 10 years. That would put you ahead of the game, and then it would also make you during your interview make it easier to answer the question.